Welcome, everybody, to the very first episode of the My Career Shop podcast, where I get to speak to people from different professions so you get an idea of what happens in the day to day of different careers to help you find out if this is the right path for you. Our guest for this episode is Ankur Chawla, a chartered professional accountant in Ontario, Canada. And he will be sharing his unique perspective of being an accountant with multiple accounting firms of different sizes, serving a variety of clients. Over time, with that wealth of experience, Ankur decided to open up his own accounting practice. Him and his team provide personal and corporate tax, consulting and advisory services to professionals such as doctors, lawyers, dentists, real estate agents, etc., and small owner-managed businesses all across Canada. So if you're a professional or thinking about starting your own business, I would highly recommend checking out AC and Partners. A link to the firm's website is in the description below. And if you're looking to find out what happens in the life of an accountant, without a further ado, enjoy the rest of the episode. Thank you for coming on to the podcast. Today with me, I have Ankur Chawla. So we're in great company because our guest here has had the opportunity to work at a firm, work at multiple firms, both good sizes, and he's had the opportunity to own his own practice. So he practices as a chartered accountant in the province of Ontario. And so tell me, how'd you get here?
Yeah, I feel like everyone has a very interesting story in terms of how their career kind of plays out, and it's funny. Like as much as how much we end up doing in our careers, I think we look back at how the journey started, and I think like I was like any other kid, where you're completely lost. You're not really sure what you want to do, which career you want to take on, and how things will play out. But it's hard because you have to start deciding your careers super early, like when you're in high school, essentially. Mm-hmm. So in Canada, and I'm sure it's probably a little bit similar in the States as well, but by the time you finish grade 10 and grade 11 and 12, we have to start picking our courses, whether we want to go down the science route, the business route, or any other specific career, and what the prerequisite courses you would need to take. So in that time, you have to start at least narrowing things that you don't want to be. So I think the journey usually starts with, hey, I know I don't want to be a doctor, or I don't want to be an engineer, or I don't want to be a lawyer, and what other options do I have left? So,
Well, you're a brown guy, so yeah. I'm sure your parents wanted you to be a doctor.
Yeah.
How did that conversation go?
So the good thing was I have an older sister who became a doctor, so I think they got the doctor out of the family already. So they were like, okay, we'll give this guy a chance to do whatever he wants to do. So I think I had the easier route where I didn't have to worry about the pressure from my parents to be a specific field, even though they always obviously they want to push you as professionals. I think that's a typical norm in a brown family. Mm-hmm. And the careers you always hear about growing up is, hey, you'll be an engineer, you'll be a doctor, you'll be a lawyer, or you might be an accountant. But those are the main things you hear. And the funny thing is, when you're growing up, you actually don't know other careers at that point either. So when I was thinking back then, I was like, I have to pick one of the 4 or one of the 5 options that might have available to me. Mm-hmm. And in grade 10, going into grade 11, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I just knew I wasn't good at science, so I wasn't going to go down the doctor route. I don't think I would have been successful, at least at that point. I definitely didn't think I liked reading much, so I know law required a lot of reading. I was not very studious. I was a B student, really, when I really... besides, the only time I used to get A's was in math. So back then, people used to tell you that, if you're good at math, you should go into accounting or engineering or something like that. So I knew engineering was much harder than accounting. So I was like, hey, you know what? I'm going to pick the easier route at that point. And I kind of chose accounting as that option back then. And I think that's how my journey essentially started. So grade 11 and 12, you kind of do all your math courses and the prerequisites for university. And then I applied to a BBA program at Wilfrid Laurier University.
What's BBA?
Bachelor's of Business Administration.
Oh, okay.
And in the way it kind of works is you apply for a BBA program, and within that program, you don't have to pick a specific career at that point, but you're going to go down the business route. So you could go into finance, you could go into operations, you could go into HR, you can go into marketing, you can go into accounting. So you have some time to even start to figure out what stream you want to be. Mm-hmm. So that's how it starts. You again in the first year of university or first year or two, you take all the basic courses in all of those fields. And at that point, as you start to narrow down your job, what you want to do as your career, then you have to start taking specific courses. So in the accounting field, we have, by the time you graduate, you're supposed to make sure you have about the 51 prerequisite credits done before you can even write the CA exams. So towards the end of it, you're taking more and more accounting courses. So you're taking finance, accounting, tax, ethics, case writing, and all these courses based on the prerequisites. So you don't have much of an option. You have to make sure you get those 51 credits done. You have to make sure you maintain an average of 70% or higher, because that's required by CPA Ontario and CPA Canada in order for you to be eligible to write the CA exams down the road. So I essentially did that. It takes about 4.5 years. So 4 years of credits, and then we had an extra semester of add-ons to get you ready to write the CA exams.
Okay, so do you feel like you had to make decisions? I know you said you wanted to do accounting, but other people probably just joined in with a BBA, and then some went into something. When did that decision actually happen in university?
So I think a lot of times coming into university, people have already decided. But the good thing is, like I said, you have the first year or two to make up and change your mind if you had to. So some people that might have come in for an accounting major might have decided that, hey, as I take some of the accounting courses, this is not really for me. I might find it too boring or something I don't really care to do. So they might switch to start taking more of the finance courses, or they might take more marketing courses. The BBA program was a little bit different. I ended up eventually graduating with econ and accounting, so I did a double major in two separate things. But in the BBA field, a lot of times there's group projects. So in those group projects, there'd be one for almost every field. There'd be one in finance, there'd be one in accounting, there'd be one in marketing or HR or in operations and stuff. So I think as you work in those teams and you work through those projects, you got to feel for what do I like, what do I not like? Where's my strengths and what's my weaknesses? What interests me? And I think as you do that in the second year, then you start to feel that, okay, I want to major in this one. I'm going to take more courses this way. I'm going to apply for jobs this way. One of the things about university is that a lot of people know what they want to do when they come in, right? So there are co-op programs and stuff like that as well. So if you have a good average the first year, you start to apply for jobs after first year. So in your summer semesters and you're doing your co-op programs, you get, I think, 4 co-ops or 4 or 5 co-ops during university. You get to work in the field that you would want to take. So if someone who was in a CA route had really good marks in the first year, they already start to get that experience in year 2, essentially, 4 months at a time or 8 months at a time, depending on the way it kind of plays out. But that's the practical experience you get to see from theory to how it would be in the real world. And again, that also helps you make that decision, because sometimes I've seen people go into an accounting co-op, be like, oh, okay, this was definitely not for me. What I'm studying versus what I'm actually doing is different, and it doesn't interest me as much, versus sometimes the other way around. Theory can be very boring sometimes, and you start to go into the field like, oh, that was interesting, because you get to see a practical side of it. And that's always nice.
So you went in with a BBA.
Yeah.
Do you think most people that become accountants go through that route, or do they come through many other business potential degrees or even other degrees and then venture into accounting?
I would say BA and BBA is the most common, but at the same time, like I was an econ and accounting major, which is the degree is the BA Bachelor of Arts. With the econ and accounting major. Some people even go to colleges, right? So you can get an accounting diploma, which will help you get those 51 credits and ensure you're ready to basically write the exams, and then you qualify for them. So I wouldn't say there's a traditional route. Lots of people come out of colleges as well. There is the fact that universities are looked on as a higher sense of education rather than a college, especially when you're talking the field of accounting. So you will have more jobs and more opportunities, at least what I feel, and how it was back when we graduated back in 2010, 2011. So I think if you know you want to do accounting and you want to go down this route, then I think it's better to go down the university route rather than college. But again, sometimes people don't mature or have the marks earlier in high school. So it doesn't matter at the end of the day. Like, you don't have to feel your route is closed just because you didn't go down the traditional route of going to university or getting a BA and then doing a major in accounting. People often do it from other majors as well. As long as they're prerequisites, you can write the exams. And as long as you can write the exams, there's opportunities out there for you.
But the prerequisites you can only get them through either a college diploma or university degree. There's no other way.
Yeah,
no training courses, nothing like that.
Yeah.
Okay, so back when you were applying for the exam, when you graduated, you needed a 70% to be eligible to sit for what?
So then eventually, once you graduate from university, now you have the prerequisites done to write your CPA exams. So I keep interchanging the word CA and CPA because in Canada, we used to be CAs back in the day. So there used to be CAs, CMAs, CGAs, which were different types of
And CA stands for what?
chartered accountants.
Okay. And what about CMA, CGA?
Chartered management accountants, chartered general accountants, and so forth. So it was essentially what type of exams you had written and how qualified you were. But over the last, I like to say 5 years, maybe, I think 5 years ago or so, they merged all these bodies as one as CPA. So as CPAs, we all fall under the same designation. So when I write my name and my signature on my emails, it's CPA/CA. But I think in the next 5 to 10 years, people will only write CPAs at the back of their designation. So once the bodies merged, the exams a little bit changed as well. So back when we were writing, essentially you had done your 51 credits. You now had to write 3 sets of exams, which was your CKE, SOA, and UFE, which was CKE was your core knowledge exam. SOA was called School of Accountancy, and UFE was your ultimate final exam, or I don't even remember what the actual term was, but CKE was a multiple choice question for us, and we had, I think it was a 4-hour exam, and they could ask you any questions within the 6 competencies that we have, and that was more specifically just to test your knowledge and whether you had the knowledge, sort of like your G1 in Canada when you're at your driver's license exam, and then there's a practical side of it later. And then the SOA was more like case writing skills, again, applying that theory in case writing for companies. If there's some issues that are going on, how do you handle it? How do you address the issues? How does it connect to your accounting skill set? And then how do you conclude on those decisions and so forth?
That's a one-day exam?
That was, I think that was a 2-day exam. SOA used to be a 2-day or a 3-day. I can't remember at the top of my head anymore. And then the last exam was the UFE, which was a 3-day exam. Day 1 used to be one big case. So it was a 8-hour exam. It was one company, a huge case, and they had all these issues in different components of their company, whether it could be a tax issue, whether it could be a finance issue, whether it could be an accounting issue, an audit issue, and so forth. So you had to address all those issues, write about them, and conclude on them, and make sure you hit enough, issues that you have to hit. Because in a case, there could be 10 issues, but you have to make sure you hit 6 of them. And you have to make sure out of the 6, there should be 4 major issues that you hit. So just because you hit 6 and you don't hit the major ones, you'll still not pass that exam. So it was more of a game of understanding, okay, what's a more serious issue versus a smaller issue. And I have to make sure I address the serious ones as well as capture some of the smaller ones to show my competence in accounting and in the field that they're testing you on. So that was day 1, and that was one big case. So I think a lot of times people used to struggle with day 1 versus day 2 and 3, because day 2 and 3 was smaller. I think there was 3 cases. So each case was anywhere between an hour to hour and a half. So 60 to 90 minutes. And you wrote 3 of them. So you had to quickly read a case, which could be a page or 2. And then you, again, solve issues on that. And they could be very specific. So one could be just for finance. One could be just for tax. Or something could be multiple with accounting and tax or something like that. But so that was a 3-day exam. So you'd go through this and you would be in this big hall with thousands of people writing around you. You have access to some of the information through like the accounting books. So you have that on your laptop and you read this in the secure module. But again, you have to keep in mind it's a timed exam. So you can't just go back and like, oh, let me figure it out now. You have to kind of know where everything is or how to research quickly or at least know what you want to look at if you need to refer back to things. But usually people took these courses for a month or 2 at a time. So they studied for quite some time. And when we wrote the UFE, I remember you would kind of have a partner with you. You would both write cases almost 5 days a week, and you would mark each other's cases. And there'd be a guideline on how to mark. So if you didn't write down a specific sentence or didn't conclude properly, you would lose marks. And it was a way of writing. So you learn that skill set.
What's a pass on that?
So I think it's bell curved. So I think it all depends on how, because every year the cases are different, right? So it's hard to judge how hard a case is
But when you were marking it according to the criteria,
right.
What did the CPA body, direction, what direction did they give you in terms of marking? And
so for example, like in day 1, they would tell you that these are the issues, right? And these are called core issues versus non-core issues. So you would have to have 3 out of the 4 core issues. So when you mark, you kind of marked in that aspect. You would see the other person found 3 out of the 4 core issues. Did he address them properly? And in those issues, they would tell you how to address it. Did they mention this specific line to say, for example, revenue recognition wasn't being met, or how to meet revenue recognition? What's the criteria, what the company needs to do, and what's the conclusion here? So you have to make sure all 3 are being met. Sometimes you would see people, and that was a skill that you learned along the way, that I can recognize all the issues, but I don't know how to address them properly, right? Or I know how to address them in my mind, but writing them down and verbalizing it and concluding on it is also a skill. So those are the things you kind of learned. And I feel it's funny, a lot of people think, oh, you have to be very smart to pass these exams. But that's not necessarily the case. Sometimes smartness can work against you because you know too much. So I knew people that I thought were brilliant. And like when you talk to them, like, this guy's going to kill it. He's going to be amazing. And really have no problem with these exams. But they failed often the first time around because they knew too much. So when they saw an issue, like, oh yeah, I know everything about it. And then they would take 20 minutes to write about an issue when you only have 15 minutes. Or you addressed 6 out of the 6 issues rather than 4 out of the 6 issues. So you have to understand also how to move on because there's a bigger picture here. Get to the point. There's a bigger picture here. Make sure you're hitting the case from an overall perspective rather than a specific perspective. So people could fail because they didn't even get to the last case sometimes. If you're in day 3, they wrote maybe 2 out of the 3, or same thing with day 2. So being able to pace yourself, address the issues, be quick about it, be direct about it, rather than, again, people can write a paragraph or people can address the same thing in 3 lines. So those are the skills that you had to learn along the way to pass the exams. And, likewise, like sometimes you met people who were not the smartest and you're like, oh, I don't know, you need to really get better at addressing the issues, but they would address just the right amount of issues and they could pass the exam. So I think it kind of goes both ways. So
that was CKE, that was SOA, and CKE, and now UFI. What was that?
UFI, that's what I was talking about was the UFI, essentially. Okay. SOA is very similar as well. SOA was less about case writing, but more about issue identification. And things have changed a little bit. So since the bodies merged, I believe you have to essentially do module 1 and module 2. And I think these modules are essentially, and the way we did it, we did an add-on course at the end of university. So 4-year university, we did 1 semester with 5 courses, and those were specific courses to get you prepared to write these exams. Now I think it's called module 1 and module 2, so you would have to do those 2 things. And then you do capstone 1 and capstone 2. So capstone 1 and capstone 2 are group-based projects. So again, case-based, but it's a project-based thing. So you get a thing assignment, you meet up with your groups, you divide and conquer on different issues, then you put a report together and you submit it. And that's your capstone 1 and capstone 2. And then you can write the one final exam, which is also a 3-day exam.
What's that?
It's called, what is the exam called? It's called the CFE now, CFE. I don't know what it stands for anymore. For us, it's called the UFE, and now it's called the CFE. But essentially, I think, same thing. The last exam is still a 3-day exam. You're still writing day 1 as the big case, and that case is a carryover from your capstone courses. So capstone is company is 1 year old, they're trying to grow, they have all these issues, and you might address that in a group-based project. When you come to your CFE, day 1 is that same company. 10 years down the road, they've gone into this bigger company. Now they have all these other issues. How do you address those? So now you do this on your own. That's your day 1. Again, day 2 and day 3 are broken up to make sure you hit all the other competencies. I believe there's 6 competencies you're supposed to hit. So the major ones that they always used to test you on was obviously audit, because that was the route most people would take out of university to work for some of the bigger firms, go into the audit field. So audit was one, financial reporting, tax. Tax was probably the least important at that time. Financial reporting, audit, tax, management accounting, governance and strategy, and finance. So those are the 6 competencies you essentially have to make sure you hit. Some at a very high level, some at a lower level. Knowing that, at the same time, for example, the tax is such a broad and big field that they'll test you on maybe a few main things, but not not if you start going through the tax book, there's too much to learn. So you're never going to be able to test somebody to see how much tax knowledge they have. So I think that was a very low level versus audit is very consistent, right? Like there's sections of an audit you need to hit. So if you're one of the things I mentioned earlier is revenue recognition. So that's a criteria in audit. Like when do we actually record revenue? And the reason it's important is because your audit determines the way the financial reports are done, if they're done accurately or not. Because hundreds and thousands of millions of people could be relying on it if it's a public company, for example, right? So that's why audit was the biggest focus, I would say, at that time. And I'm pretty sure it's probably is to a certain extent now as well. But things have changed because now someone who wants to be a CMA, for example, doesn't want to go to the audit route. They don't have to technically hit that competency. You still have to know it from a case-based perspective, but you might practically never really get there.
So the CMA, they write different exams?
No, now I think everybody writes the same exams.
Oh, okay.
But the competencies that you have to hit even after. So from a passing perspective, you still have to understand and pass, which is all theory-based. But when they go out in the world, one of the things you have to do after you pass the exams is still get 30 months of experience.
30 months?
30 months, so 2.5 years. So if you are going down the traditional route, I'll call it traditional from an accounting standpoint, where you're working for one of the bigger companies, they have an audit department. You need a certain amount of hours in that field versus someone who goes down the non-traditional route. They go down, that's called the experience verification route. So you can now become a CA or a CPA by having a mentor, but not hit an audit competency at all. So out of those 6 competencies that I talked about earlier, you might only have to hit 3 of them in a practical field. So you would do every 6-month check-ins. So there's about 5 or 6 check-ins in a course of the person's first 30 months, where they're checking off what have you learned in the practical field that you're in. So if you might be working for a company, not one of the public companies, more of an industry type of company, you might be in their finance department. So you might be only required to learn your finance, financial reporting, and maybe management accounting, versus no audit and no tax. Or somebody who is in the compliance field might have to learn tax, might have to learn financial reporting, and might have to learn finance.
And you said that was experience verification what?
Route.
Oh,
Yeah,
that's
what it's called.
Oh,
It's called experience verification. So your mentor basically checks in with you every 6 months, and then we submit these reports to CPA Ontario, and they're the ones to make a final decision whether you've been approved. And usually, once you've reached those competencies and you've had those 30 months of experience, you'll likely get approved and get your CPA.
So this is what I got on how to become CPA in the province of Ontario. You go into a business degree.
Yeah.
After that, you have to get 51 credits. You need to have an average of 70%.
Yeah.
You have to finish Module 1, Module 2, Capstone 1, Capstone 2. You have to write an exam called the CFE.
Yeah.
After that, there's 2 ways for you to actually get the experience validated to get your license. One is the traditional route where you go work for one of the bigger firms. And I'm guessing there's medium-sized firms that also offer that.
They do, yeah. So I would actually almost say public firms, public accounting firms, versus the industry type of firms.
Okay. And then the other way to do it is the experience verification.
That's right, yeah.
And after that, okay, so now you're a full-fledged CPA.
Yep.
And you finally got there. How many years did this take? Like the whole Module 1, Module 2, Capstone 1, 2, CFE, how long does all of that take?
So that all happens within the first year. So
and is that a requirement?
That's a requirement. Well, and you might take multiple years to pass it. So keep in mind, these exams only happen so many times in a year. So I think the CFE only happens, for example, twice a year.
Oh, okay.
So, and a lot of times people will write it at a certain time. So I think one happens around April or May, and the other one happens in September. So often people who are in the public accounting field don't write in April or May because that's the busiest time for tax and audit purposes for them. So they often want to write in May because you need about 6 to 8 weeks to study as well. So they'll take the summer off, and a lot of the firms will pay for this time off, or you'll take some vacation time and some study time, and you'll again get in those groups, go to these learning courses sometimes if your firm pays for it or if you want to register. And write in September. So if you missed the May because you didn't choose to write there, you miss a September, you might not write in May again. You might still wait till write the following September.
So hold on a minute. After you get the 70% and you apply for module one, are you saying you pretty much work at a firm?
Yeah, you don't have to. Again, like I said, you could be in either the public firm or industry and still write module one. And you would have to. And module one doesn't. Your capstone won't require specific time off because they're more group based projects as well.
Yeah.
So after work, you would meet up with your group or on the weekends and stuff and get that done over a couple of months.
The time that you spend working at the firm while you're writing all of this, does this ever contribute towards the 30 months of experience?
Yeah. Your 30 months starts essentially right away.
Okay.
Yeah. So
that's good.
Yeah. Yeah.
So for that 1 year that you're studying, you at least get 12 months of experience if you work in a firm.
Yeah.
Same thing with experience verification?
Correct.
Because you're
Same
covering
idea.
those competencies.
Same idea. Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. So technically it's 18 months after, hopefully,
if you pass
everything.
Yeah.
But you have to be disciplined, obviously, if you're going to do that. That's probably a tough year in the accounting world.
I think you know what, I look back at it now, I kind of miss those times. They were fun. You don't have the pressure of, once you get into the work field, you're working for the rest of your life. But during that time, you still have, you're still kind of studying. Your summer, I remember when I used to study with my friends and stuff. So every morning we'd wake up, we'd go to Tim Hortons, grab an ice crab, grab breakfast, write one case together in the morning, hang out for lunch, write another case in the afternoon, and then go home. And it was chill. You were done for the day. There was not, like
the good old days.
Tomorrow. Yeah, you call it the good old days. Sure, there is a sense of pressure because as exams coming closer, you're like, I do only have one chance this year to maybe write this and pass it, and hopefully it all goes well. And I failed the first time around, so that time you're a bit. It's sometimes depressing and it's really really bad feeling, obviously, like not having to pass it the first time around. But again, I think I always say it this way, right? Like me not passing the first time around was more so the fact that I didn't really learn how to pass the exam rather than I didn't have the knowledge to pass the exam. So I think that's what it is. Often it's a game you have to learn. It's a skill set, and you want to be in the middle of the pack when you're writing the exams. You don't want to be that one person who's trying to get the highest marks because you want to have the highest number of issues hit and everything addressed properly and the highest marks possible. But that also gives you a hard chance to fail if you didn't finish the case properly, if you weren't good at writing, if your writing skills weren't great. And I think that's where I used to where my lacking was, that I couldn't write very well. So I had to train myself on that process a little bit longer. So when I wrote the case first time around, I also think the partner that you work with at that time in those days matters. Sometimes you would feel like, I remember the second time around, I was in a different group because the first time around I was with my friend, and one of the girls that would mark my case, if I didn't conclude properly, she'd be like, "Oh, I'm not going to be giving you this issue." And that time I was like, "Damn, you're so harsh," right?
Yeah.
Like I'm like I freaking addressed the issue and I have everything written down, but she wouldn't give it to me. So and you do this over a course of 6 weeks. So eventually I was like, I don't want to deal with this anymore. So I started writing down exactly what you want. But in a way, I think that was a good thing because that's how maybe the markers are looking at it, right? So it kind of forces you to understand that just because what you might think you know, you're not showing that on paper. You have to show it on paper.
Yeah.
Right? So people can't get into your mind and say that, oh, actually you are competent enough.
Yeah.
They have to kind of see it on paper. They have no other way of judging it. So it takes 30 months.
But before we move on, so it's important to know that when you're writing these exams, there's more to the exam than just knowledge. There's you got to actually figure out, first of all, the dynamics of the exam, the timing of the exam. What does the examiner want? Right? Yeah. Because, I had to study for the bar exam as well. And I remember when we were studying, everybody had their own style of studying and a lot of them didn't work. Right? And you kind of have to, sometimes it takes a little bit of experience to figure out what the hell do they actually want. Right? So that's good to know. So moving on, years through the trenches. And now you're finally a CPA. You had a party, I hope. And now you're actually working. Do you typically just continue working at the firm that you were at? Is that the traditional route, I'm guessing?
You know what, actually, I would say there's a very high turnover in the public accounting world, where you go through your 30 months, you get your CPA, and you actually, I would say, I don't know, and this is a completely made up number, so you can fact check this eventually and find out. But more than 50% is my guess. If I have to put a number on it, I would say maybe 65% of the people actually leave public accounting. So they no longer want to be working for one of the big four or public accounting firms. Because I also think the first couple of years is tough based on practically the experience isn't. I don't know if you feel that how much knowledge you have are you actually doing that in the real practical world? People to go down that audit route, I think the junior level that you are at that time, for example, you might be working at different audits throughout the last 30 months, but you only be responsible for, hey, I'm only going to verify the banking transactions, or I'm only going to verify accounts receivable or accounts payable, or certain types of expenses and so forth. So it's a very repetitive type of work. So you often feel like, oh, it's long hours. You've been studying for the last 30 months and you finally get your CPA, and a lot of doors open up. I think CPA is a big stamp on your resume saying that, hey, you're a person that's competent. If you need to figure something out in any industry, you probably can go figure it out because you have the skill set to learn and apply. So as soon as you finish that, you see a lot of other industry type of jobs open up for you that are looking for someone with 2 or 3 years of experience, has a CPA, and wants to be eventually, let's say, a senior or a manager in a company. So those often tend to be a pay bump for a lot of the people as well. And also a chance for them to switch industries or go into a more specific type of industry versus being in public accounting that you might do some repetitive work in the first couple of years.
So let's stick to public accounting because that's what the folks want to hear.
Sure.
You get your job at some public accounting firm.
Yeah.
And so what do you do here every single day? So let's talk, how many years of experience do you have?
So at this point, I've been working since 2011, essentially. So about 12 years. Yeah.
We got a veteran. And so with 12 years of experience, let's talk about, if you can gloss over a little bit more of the junior stuff.
Yeah.
And let's discuss, what does an accountant actually do? So the reason why I'm more interested in that is because what happens is you get to your job and you have this thought process of what an accountant does. And my thought process is you're sitting there with an asset balance sheet.
Yeah.
Because I did accounting in grade 11, 12, and I'm just literally plus, minus, plus, minus, plus, minus.
Right.
So tell me, what does an accountant actually do when they work at a public accounting firm?
And I'll before I kind of just jump into that, at the public accounting firm, a lot of times people, like I said, before switching into industry, there's another option as well, which is switching within different departments. So someone who was in an audit field might say that, hey, you know what, I actually want to go into tax, for example, right? Or I want to go into more of a CFO role to work on different companies and apply my different skill set. So you can isn't
that in private industry though?
You can become a CFO eventually down in the private industry as well. But even within the accounting world, there's an advisory department as well. So consulting and advisory. So you're acting like, as a consultant, which could be much more something you enjoy because again, you work at different companies, you see what the company does, and you're providing your knowledge and experience on what they should do to be more successful, or whether it's to cut cost or whether it's so. Like for example, the big four like Deloitte, Ernst & Young, PricewaterhouseCoopers, and KPMG, like they're not technically consulting firms, but they have a huge consulting department. Like often their consulting departments are actually bigger than their accounting and tax departments. But at the same time, there's traditional firms out there, just specifically consulting firms, right? Like A.T. Kearney, and I just know that firm because my brother-in-law worked in it. But a lot of there's a lot of consulting firms out there. So people usually either go to industry or switch within those streams. But assuming you stay in the audit route, then your day-to-day as a junior was, again, like I said, could be considered repetitive and boring to a certain extent because you're doing all the work, the grunt work that nobody else wants to do, right? As a junior, you've usually done that for the first 2 years of your things. But by the time you get your CPA, you have turned into a senior or very close to being a manager at that time, which is a little bit different because I think when you look at it, a manager's role is more so not necessarily doing the work all the time, but to make sure the project is moving along from the timeline that it should be moving on. So you will become responsible for dealing with clients directly at times, basically addressing issues to the partner and the junior staff to make sure everything kind of gets moving. And again, catch any mistakes that the junior level might not have done properly, or teach them. At the same time, deal with clients, get the information that you need. So that becomes a little bit more interesting because you're looking at a bigger picture now. So you're making sure the file as a whole makes sense, making sure we're doing all the things that we need to do while managing people. So which is a little bit more interesting. You get a chance to teach, you get to look at different issues, you get to do research at times. So that can be quite interesting. And again, if you stick it out, there's the junior staff accountants, senior staff accountants, then there's managers, senior managers, and eventually you have a chance to become a partner at a big firm as well.
So like we got to the manager level.
Yeah.
Prior to that, what is an accountant in, you did audit.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So I'm pretty sure nobody that's listening to this, if they're in high school, knows what an audit is.
Right.
So let's talk about the first few years. What were you actually doing in a law firm? You said that there were long hours.
Right.
So like how long are these hours when you're a junior at a firm?
Accounting firm, yeah. That's a good question because I actually switched. I was in audit the first few years, and then I actually myself debated whether I want to go to industry or switch altogether, and eventually ended up switching to the compliance and tax side. So essentially, the firm that we opened up is you do a little bit of consulting and advisory, compliance work, and tax work, and I found that much more something that I enjoyed and up my alley. So as a junior, by the time you finish, let's just say you were in the audit route, you can either stick it out, continue doing the same thing. So you will get to, audit's a very tough field as well because it's a changing world. The way businesses used to do business 20 years ago versus now it's completely different. So the IT side of it has come in quite a bit. Mm-hmm. So the way you audit firms is completely different. You're always learning something new. Your question was,
what do you do when you're actually performing audits? Because before you moved over, you did do audits.
Yeah. So it's again the main purpose of it. I'll kind of explain the purpose of an audit, right? So audits are done typically by companies that need to present their financial statements to a third party, right? Because they need to rely on these financial statements and whether those numbers are actually accurate or not. So as an auditor, you're a third party coming in to look at the company's financial statements and confirm or deny whether they are somewhat accurate or not. Like an audit doesn't mean you've gone through every single transactions to see it's accurate, but you're making sure as a whole, you've gone through a lot of the bigger transactions and you can verify that, hey, the numbers that are presented are accurate. So you can rely on this information and use that information for whatever purpose you might need. Mm-hmm. So if you look at a public company, and I mean the stocks and stuff that people invest in, they all of them have to get audited because those statements have to get out to the public. There's millions of people looking at those statements and making a decision whether they want to invest in a company or not.
Essentially, there's no shady stuff going on.
Exactly.
So let's say Walmart. Yeah. Walmart comes to your firm. Yeah. They're like, here, Chawla, I have 5, I guess, just yearly financial statements. Here, dump it on your table. Yeah. And you have to go through the financial statements through whatever techniques that you've learned. Correct. And certify at the end of it that, hey, we looked at all your stuff. Yeah. Seems to add up and they're good. Yeah. And this will have an impact on their stock. Like suppose there were some problems, and all of those things. Yeah. So let's say in the same exact example, Walmart, how long does like an audit actually take? Yes. And like how many clients? Like I'm guessing a firm has tons of clients, and as a junior, are you literally looking at it by yourself? No. So again, I would not even take on a client, ever a public company client, because it requires thousands of hours and so much manpower behind it as well. Yeah. So again, usually it's the reason we hear about the term Big Four is because these bigger companies have the capacity and the staff to be able to audit these large companies. We might do audits when I worked at a mid-sized firm, for example. Again, I did audit for a very little time, but our audit team could be anywhere between 5 to 10 people. So it didn't have to be super large, but there are also only, I would say, businesses that were under 20 million, for example. So not massive revenues versus Walmart and stuff, they're in billions of dollars, right? So there's so many more transactions, so much more staff needed. So a company like Deloitte, for example, when they take that on, an audit for one of the largest companies could go for months. It could be a 2-month audit or a 3-month audit because you have so much to go through. And there could be 50 people or 20 people on your staff, depending on
again, the size of the company and what kind of information you have to kind of go through. But again, the bigger the company, like a company like Walmart or something like that, they also have a lot of internal control. So they have to also make sure they're not doing shady stuff and presenting things as quickly and as clean as possible, so that way the auditors can get through their things as fast as possible and provide that opinion that these statements are in fact legitimate and there's nothing going on that shouldn't be. But yeah, it takes months at a time. So again, different year ends for different companies. So you could be doing audit throughout the whole year, but usually, again, public companies, all of them have the December year ends. So your first couple of months from like January to March, you're really focused on it because you do have to present those statements within the first quarter rather than, because there's also a sense of relevance, right? If I'm doing an audit for the 2022 year end, and I give you those statements in 2024, those statements don't mean anything anymore. 2 years have passed by. The company is completely doing something different. So if I invest based on historical information, it's tough for me to really have any sense of value of that. So it has to be done quickly. It has to be done fast. It has to be relevant in that time frame. So that's why the long hours come in.
Yeah. So what are those long hours? Like how many, let's just say first few years, how many hours is a junior accountant actually working?
Yeah. And
let's say you work for a mid-sized firm.
Yeah, and I think even for the larger firms, I think it's pretty consistent because I think your practice grows based on the type of clients you have and how many hours you'll end up working. And it is a seasonal business to a certain extent. So whether it was audit, and I had a lot of friends that worked for the Big Four and they worked similar hours to us. I was more so in tax later on, so I worked a little bit later. But my busiest time was April because personal tax deadlines would come through at that time. So now you have not only some of the corporate deadlines coming in, but also personal. So we worked very long hours in April. And versus some of the audit team will work longer hours in March or February, just because they have to get it done a little bit sooner.
So let's break this down.
Yeah.
Because before we jump into tax, I'll talk to you about tax, and I'm going to talk to you about compliance and advisory, because those seem to be the main competencies at a public firm.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So audit, give me like a ballpark, because you said there's seasons, right? So audit season is tough in March, right? How much are these guys working?
I would like to say they're working at least, and I think things have changed now, but they're working at least 55 to 65 hours a week during those 2 months. So I think that's when the job is very demanding. So someone that likes or work-life balance throughout the whole year will struggle in those moments, because in that moments you might have a family to worry about. You might have just a social life to worry about, which gives you a peace of mind as well, right? Like, again, people have different circumstances, but working 60, let's just say 60-hour weeks, if you're trying to do that in 5 days, that's 12-hour days. If you're trying to do it in 60, that's still 10-hour days. And that doesn't include like, I woke up and I'm going to work. That's already time spent at work. It's 10 billable hours, for example. It's 12 billable hours. So like you are working together. You're at the firm usually with staff. You're working late.
Of note, I know when you started, you were definitely working in the office 5, 6, however many days.
Yeah.
In the field today, is it in office, hybrid, remote?
Yeah, I think because of COVID, everything has become hybrid, I would say, and it was remote for a very long time as well. So you took your laptops home and you work from home, and you still put in the same hours, but I guess your commute got cut down, especially if when I used to work downtown Toronto, an hour there, hour back, that was you realize how much time it was taking out of your day as well.
And how tired you get.
Yeah. And you come home, you have no energy to do anything else. You're sitting on the couch, you're like, let me just watch some TV now. So I think during that time, it is demanding. I don't think you have the traditional work-life balance 9-to-5 type of jobs at that moment. But at the same time, I think you do get to make up at different times of the year. So usually summers for accountants are usually the nicer times because clients are gone, not as much deadline-based work. So often most firms will have Fridays off in the summer. Some of the firms have tried to do Fridays off for most of the year if they can, just to attract the staff and keep, again, avoid people turning over because there's such a huge turnover in the industry.
So you're saying outside of busy time, which is like for audit January to March and for tax January to April, you have a long weekend?
Yeah. Essentially, I have, at least at my firm now, I have my staff take Fridays off starting June, July, and August. Basically, those 3 months, they have long weekends every single weekend.
That's a benefit.
Yeah, that's a great benefit. And in Canada, it's cold up here at times. So I feel in the winter, no one's really doing anything anyway. It gets dark quickly. It's cold. You're not going to be out much versus the summers are great. You want to enjoy your summers. You want to enjoy family time. Even from a family perspective, like your kids are off in the summer. If you want to spend time with your kids, you have Fridays off all the time. You can spend more time with your kids and take your vacations and travel and do whatever you need to do. But during the winter times, sometimes I personally have always felt that way. I'm like, I'd rather just work during the winter times anyway and then enjoy my summers and Fridays off because that's a huge benefit for me. So for me, that trade-off of having a seasonal type of hours at times is worth it.
Wow, that is cool. I mean, I've seen it throughout our life, always having long weekends, a lot of golf days.
Yeah.
I'm guessing most of the work that you're doing is on a computer.
Yeah.
You're sitting on a computer.
Pretty much all of it. I think we have become so paperless. Some of the smaller firms that I worked at 15 years ago, when I was doing some co-op work and things like that as well, that time was a lot of paper, and you would have a client drop off files, and you're kind of rummaging through files, scanning things as you needed. Versus now, it's so paperless. So essentially, I carry my laptop around. I might need to print things once in a while just to go through things a certain way, but yeah, very paperless.
Okay. All right, then we can move on. So, have you worked in tax?
A little bit. I wouldn't say I would say I'm more of a broad accountant in the sense like we understand tax, but at the same time, tax, like I said, is such a deep field that people have, like bigger firms will have departments just based on tax and they're doing sole research on specific issues all the time. So often smaller firms like mine will, integrate with other tax firms to make sure we are able to provide an in-depth tax help to any client that they need it. But at the same time, we understand issues as a whole because I worked in compliance and advisory to a certain extent. So, I work with a lot of small or owner-managed businesses and professionals and stuff. So, helping them make sure they're compliant from any regulations from income tax. At the same time, at the end of the day, our main goal is to make sure not only are they compliant, but also how can they be as tax efficient as possible. So if an issue is coming up for a company based on how much money they make or how much money they want to withdraw, take personal salaries, and just the different things that they might want to do in the company, they might require special tax treatment and special tax work, which not every accountant will do. But again, if you're specifically certified in tax, some people take the in-depth tax course to learn all these different loopholes for having multiple companies set up or doing different things to remove taxable income and pay as little tax as possible. So those things you continue learning and the loopholes keep changing because as different governments come into play, they'll say you can no longer do this, and this is considered, tax evasion versus it used to be a tax loophole.
Well, you've told me that. I know you've told me about the doctors. They can incorporate, and obviously they pay different type of tax, and something happened with real estate agents as well.
Yeah. And different tax rates can allow you to do different things, right? So at the end of the day, the goal for most people when they go to an accountant is to like, hey, how do I pay the least amount of tax possible?
Yeah.
Also file my taxes and make sure I'm staying compliant. I don't want to I don't want to go to jail or something like that. But at the same time, how do I save as much money as possible? Yeah. Right. And there's a lot of gray area you end up working with because just the way the Tax Act is also written, like, something can kind of fall in both ways. Like a lot of times for example, I'll buy a laptop. Am I buying it for a personal use or just the business use, right? Like, and sometimes you use things for both, but you can write that off, for example, right? So that's a very small scale example, but this gets bigger and bigger, right? Someone might be buying a car and now they're like, hey, I know I want to drive my car for business purposes, but it's also my primary car for home. Like, how does this work? Like, how does that affect me from a tax perspective? So is it worth me buying it in a company or whether it's better to buy it personally? Again, depending on what type of business you are, what you do might have a different answer. So I think that's where the advisory comes in. So we're essentially their quote unquote, also their financial advisors to a certain extent. So clients don't just call me for big, massive tax issues. Sometimes they're just asking me questions like, hey, I'm about to do this. Does it make sense to do it this way or that way? Or, hey, I might buy a house in the next 5 years and I'll need this much money from my corporation. So what's the best way to do it now? Let's be proactive and think about it. So that's the advisory side of things at a small level. And obviously when we were talking about consulting at a Big Four, that's more specific consulting for larger firms to see where they can cut costs and save money. And I never did that personally. So I'm sure there's a lot more to it. But again, ours are very similar. We all work on deadline related stuff. So Many companies essentially can have any year end, and we have to file within 6 months, and their taxes payable are due within 3 months. So we're working on a company's deadline. So every accountant could be slightly different because most accountants tend to have a lot of December year ends. So they still stay busy in the first half of the year versus the second half of the year. I tend to be a bit more spread out because I have a lot of corporations that have different year ends throughout the year. So I'm fairly spaced out. But April is one time for me that's always busy because of personal tax. So all my clients still have to file personal tax before April 30th. So my March and April ends up being super busy. And again, the hours during that time tend to go up, and just based on when the information comes in. So some weeks can be much worse than others. Like there has been times where I worked 80 hours in a week, and there has been times where I worked only 50 hours in tax season as well. So it just depends on when the information flowed in, how responsive and good were the clients when they brought the information in, and sometimes they just bring in information late, or issues can happen, right? You could fall sick for a week.
Yeah.
Like you might not be able to work.
That happens all the time.
Yeah.
So when you're talking about all of these hours,
Yeah.
can you tell our audience whether they're billable hours or regular hours? What's the difference? What is a billable hour?
Yeah, so that's a good question, because I think in accounting, we have to give accountability to our clients on how much time we're spending on everyone's file. So I think it's really important. Well, it's for both purposes, not just for clients, also for the firm itself to track how much someone's working. Like, you have to keep in mind, like, larger the firm, harder it is to keep track of your employees and what they're doing and how much time you're spending on a file. And again, that's a direct impact on eventually a client's bill as well. So whenever we do work for clients as well, like, we can't give them an exact price that, hey, we're going to do this for you and it's going to cost you $1,000, because it might take longer depending on how complicated the issues are, right? If you tell me to, for example, put together even a set of financial statements, if it's all organized well for me, I can do it in 2 hours. But if it's a chute full of receipts, it might take me a day, right? So it all depends on how much time you spend, and as you spend that time, you have to bill the clients accordingly. So we always have billable hours and rates associated with those hours. So as a junior, you could charge $150 an hour. As a partner, you could charge up to $1,000 an hour, depending on what you're doing. So during tax time and busy season times, I think when we say that we have to work about between 50 to 70 or 80 hours at times, we're talking in a sense of billable hours. Don't get me wrong that you might not have to do 50 hours of specific work, but you have to show that you've spent 50 hours at the firm doing something. Out of that, 40 might be billable hours and 10 hours might be other things, administrative work that you might have done on a file. But how did you spend your 50 hours is important, because all the type of work you do will have different charge out rates and billable rates. So I think that's sometimes the most annoying part of being an accountant, or at least being a professional at times. I felt you're being tracked all the time. That you can't just be like, hey, today was a chill day. I really wasn't in the mood. I kind of got some work done. But I think how slow you did that work will have an impact on how much you can charge. Like, if two people are doing the same thing and they're bringing a file to me, and I can see one person did it in 7 hours, the other one did it in 15 hours. That, to me, like, I would want to give work to the guy who does it faster, right? So that's an impact on how your managers look at you, how your quality of the work starts to matter. So it's not about just doing it fast, but it's also the quality. Same example, I would rather take a guy who did something in 15 hours, but it's perfect, versus someone who did it in 7 hours, but I'm like, hey, this is complete garbage. I have to redo the whole work, right? So I think there's a sense of how much time you spend doing some work, but also your accuracy and your efficiency matters. So as you work in the firms, in the beginning, like as a junior, again, there's a lot of training, there's a lot of repetitive work. So there isn't a sense of quality always, but at the same time, you want to do things well, but spend the hours especially, right? I think someone who works, at least back in the day, was someone who worked longer and harder, would stand out to a certain extent. And I think it still does. But when I say things have changed a little bit, I think people have taken control over their work-life balance a little bit. So you see a lot more pushback on people not caring always to go the extra mile to make sure your managers or your partners are happy. They also want to have a sense of their control over their own life, which I think also good to a certain extent, because I think in this field, I think as a professional, it's really easy to lose that work-life balance. Someone who's
That's something I really want to stress on in 2 minutes. So you said billable hours. So I'm in the legal field. Do you guys also bill in increments?
Yeah.
So like 6-minute increments?
6 minutes increments.
So what that essentially means is, suppose I worked on a file for 13 minutes, right? I would bill 0.3 times whatever my billable rate is,
Yeah.
right? The same thing?
Exactly, yeah.
But you mentioned that based on the type of work that you do, you bill differently?
Yeah. So
I don't have that.
We had that because and I think we did that. And then not every firm has it. Sometimes they have it just set rates that, hey, you're at this level, you're going to charge at this rate an hour. And I think mid-sized firms, you do it a little bit differently because the way your billing model might be different, right? So if I'm taking on a client to do bookkeeping work, I can't bill them $150 an hour because one, I'm not competing against anybody to secure that work, because most like bookkeeping firms, for example, might be doing something for $60 an hour or $70 an hour, $80 an hour. I can be more expensive. That's not a problem. But if I'm completely out of the ballpark range, then it almost doesn't make sense. So I have to learn to have a specific rate on a billing type of work sometimes. And then also leverage my staff accordingly. So if I'm getting more bookkeeping work, for example, I have to hire accordingly. I'm not going to hire a 7-year CPA with lots of experience to do bookkeeping work. Then goes against their skill set, right? Versus I would hire a technician that maybe is not doing their CPA to teach them bookkeeping and have them do that work.
Fair enough. So based on the amount of, I guess, expertise required, there's slightly different billable rates, but not everyone does this. And but one of the main things that I do actually want to talk about, actually that's later, but let's talk about work-life balance.
Yeah.
So it sounds to me that you have bad seasons and you have great seasons, right? So the summers are good seasons, right? And you can spend time with your family and do all of that good stuff.
Yeah.
But the bad seasons are January to March if you're an audit.
Yeah.
I'm guessing compliance advisory doesn't make that difference in its same April issues.
April issues, I think, are there for everybody, essentially. But yeah, I think those are they always say in accounting, your first couple of months are always more heavier from a workload perspective than the summer months. Fall onwards tends to be pretty the 9 to 5-ish type of role.
Okay, and like during the rest of the year, let's take the summer out and let's take a really busy season out.
Yeah.
What's the rest of it like?
Yeah, again, like I said, the 9 to 5 is probably the norm.
Okay.
And don't get me wrong, I think there's a lot of flexibility as well. If you're working with as a manager or with partners or even as juniors, you can have flex days, right? So you could choose to work different hours. Some people, a lot of times we had people in the industry that came in at 7 in the morning because they were morning people. They'd be up early, they would come into work early, they'd be out the door by 3, right? Like that's just the hours they prefer to work. And sometimes they work flex hours, so they might work in the morning, take the afternoon off, and finish off the rest of the work at night when you don't necessarily need to work with a client or someone specific. So there's a lot of flexibility in the field as well, which I think with COVID it's gotten better because people have lives. You have to also understand, during the weekdays when everything else is open is sometimes what you need to get something done on your personal life, right? So you might take a Monday off, but work the Sunday to make sure you make up the hours. If that's what, if it's an hour based and just like deadline based job type of thing.
Cool. So, I mean, I want to go back to what we were discussing earlier. We were talking about, so if you're in audit, you perform audits, that's how you fill the vast majority of your time.
Correct.
If you're in tax, there are multiple areas of tax, but most of your time is spent dealing with tax-related issues, filing taxes, things of that nature. Yeah. Can you tell me a little bit about compliance and advisory?
Yeah, compliance.
High level.
Yeah. And I think compliance is more so of the filing of taxes and so forth. So when it comes to compliance, for example, if I have a corporate client, right? A corporate client needs to have a set of financial statements. They need to have their corporate tax return done. They have to file a HST return. They have to file potentially their T4s for all their employees and T5s if they're taking out dividends and things like that as well. And so all these things have a deadline on when they're due. So typically 6 months within their year end, they have to file their corporate tax return, right? And your financial statements come along with it. So you're always working in that aspect. So making sure a client, first of all, gets everything done. That's your compliance piece of it. And like I said, and advisory kind of comes along with it because throughout the year, as you're deciding on how much to either pay yourself as a business owner or take a dividend or buy a car in the corporation or buying assets or thinking about selling your business or acquiring business or anything like that. These are all advisory things that come along with it.
Yeah, so lots of moving parts. You're supposed to have the oversight over it.
Exactly.
And that's what they pay you for.
Yeah, and I think eventually they're not just paying you for the compliance, because there's a lot of people that could get compliance done quickly and fast and cheap as well, but they want to make sure they have a sounding body that they can always refer back to and say that, hey, if I bring this issue up, I know it'll get taken care of. Nothing will get missed. And I think that's the compliance and advisory side of the business at the low level.
I want to talk a little bit about what's the stress level like as an accountant, and does it change as, let's say, when you're a junior, when you're a senior manager, partner, and I'm sure it has more to do with other tasks that come along because, like you said, a senior manager has a mentoring role,
right.
So they're doing different things. Right. But let's just talk. Is an accountant's life stressful?
You know what? It certainly can be. I think every role comes with different types of stress. I always say this. I think a lot of times stress has to do with a very specific circumstance that you might be put in at times in a situation. So if I'm just speaking broadly for accountants, the simple part of stress is that, hey, we're working on a deadline-based environment. If I can't get my deadline finished, I'm going to be stressed about it because the managers are going to be asking for where the work is. If you're a manager, the partners are asking for where the work is. Because again, you're delivering something to a client. You can't just deliver something on your own time. You have to do it based on the client's time. So the more rushed you are to finish something, the higher the stress level becomes, because now not only are you going to work odd hours and late nights and the long hours to get something done, but also you have to make sure the quality stays high. So as you know, and people know this, right? So if you're working 16 hours in a day, towards the back end of your day, you're not going to be as sharp as you were in the first half of your day, right? Yeah. So if your quality is decreasing, there's a higher risk of what we're really giving to our managers or the partners or the clients. And if there's something wrong in there, that's a huge liability issue at times. So that creates a stress for a partner, that creates stress for a manager, and that kind of gets drilled down. And often it depends on who your partners and managers might be, because they can also make your life as simple as hard as possible, right? And I'm sure you've seen this in the work field, where I've had managers that will give me things last minute and they'll be like, oh, I want this done by tomorrow. And that's very stressful for you, because you haven't been just sitting there waiting for this one task to come in. There's tons of things you have on your plate already, and you're like, now I have to remanage my work to make sure I get something done for somebody else. And that's stressful for you. Versus there's great managers out there that'll give you something like, hey, these are the 3 things you need to get done. This one needs to be done next week. This is due in 2 weeks. And this you can do whenever you have time. It's not as important.
How organized your manager is makes a difference in your life.
Massive impact, right? Exactly. So organization skills can be a huge reason why you stress or not stress, and who passes that on to you and from what level. I know you've seen that multiple times in your career.
Too much.
Yeah.
Talking about organizational skills, you said you came into this field because when you were in high school, you're like, I'm good at math.
Yeah.
And this seems like a good field to go into.
Yeah.
Now that you actually got into the field, right? What skills do you think a successful accountant ought to have? Like they should have this. And what type of personality characteristics, now you have your own firm, would you not want to hire? Like stay the hell away from this profession if you are these people.
That's funny. And, going back to that comment, when I was in high school thinking that, hey, I'm good at math, I should go into accounting. I think your math skills have very little to do with being a good accountant. Like things like you're basically adding and subtracting most of the time, and it's basic math. You're not doing algebra and calculus to solve a problem, right? So I think a lot of times people always say that in a wrong way in high school, that, hey, you're good at math, so you'd be a good accountant. I think you have to be okay at math as long as you can understand math. I think you'll figure it out. That's the simplest part. But I think to be a good accountant, I think to be in this field, one of the skills I always say that are a huge mandatory thing almost is how detail oriented you can be. If you're a person that's thorough, that'll go through things properly. Attention to detail really matters, because and again, there's different levels to that, but you need a certain level to be met. Because
and would you say that that's consistent in audit, tax, compliance? I think anywhere you go.
I think so.
Okay.
Because again, you miss on some tax details or some tax issues, or you do a calculation wrong. Because again, as a partner, I think we're very much on our feet. So our role when we're talking to a new client, they'll say, I have this and this issues. At the back of our minds, we sometimes do a lot of these calculations or this understanding of, oh yeah, maybe this is how it'll play out. So we can advise a certain way. So if you have major issues in the way you are paying attention to that detail and not listening to what a client might be saying, because what they say has an impact on which box it lies in, and based on a certain box, it'll have a certain outcome. So if you miss attention to detail, not just at a partner level, but at the very junior levels, right? If you're not paying attention to what's been given to you, where to get the information from, how to organize it together, and the details to it, you're going to present the wrong information every single time, or more often than not. And that's a skill set will be a big deterrent in terms of advancing in your career.
Okay.
So as someone who is not a focused individual in terms of finding the attention to detail, or always thinks big picture and high level, and I feel like they can be okay in the career, but I don't think that's a skill set that's often the best.
Okay, so organization skills will help you definitely. Attention to detail will help you.
Yeah.
It sounds like there's a lot of client interaction.
Yeah.
So communication skills ought to be really good.
Yeah.
Would you say that an introvert would suffer in this field just because, or are there areas in accounting where an introvert can just do work on a computer, for instance?
Yeah. So you know what? I wouldn't say the introvert would suffer, because again, when you're doing, for example, at the junior level, all the vouching and compliance work, you can be somewhat of an introvert and still get good quality work done, because again, you're paying attention to detail, you're getting things done, accuracy, timing, and efficiency is still there. And if you don't have the social skills, and that's not to say you won't be a good accountant, you can still be a great accountant, and you can still have a lot of success in that career. So, we see this all the time where a lot of, for example, and I'm just throwing this out there, but a lot of tax accountants, for example, they have a vast amount of knowledge that nobody else has based on their experience and how long they've been in the industry, but they're not the best person, right? So they're not able to sit in front of a client and sell them that this is what we should be doing, versus somebody else might be better at that. So that social skills are useful, and I think if you have them, they can excel your career that much faster and help you. But at the same time, I wouldn't say that, hey, you don't have social skills, then don't be an accountant. You can certainly be an accountant. And you hear the term that accountants are boring. It comes from that aspect of, you meet a lot of people that are introverts, smart, know what they're doing, they can focus on detail, they're organized, and they can provide good quality of work. Some of the best mentors I've had have been socially awkward at times, but they're very smart people. They knew what they were doing. So you can definitely be good and have a good career.
So it sounds like being personable helps, right?
Very much so.
Not absolutely mandatory.
Very much so.
Your people care more about how their taxes are done rather than how good of a talking game you have.
Correct. Yeah. I'll say this, to become a partner essentially at the firms, that time, that social skill set can be a massive difference. Yeah. So that's when at a specific time you might say that, hey, if I didn't have this, I almost couldn't do it. And that might be true in certain fields or certain cases based on which firm you might be at. So or what specific accounting career you were kind of taking on. But definitely not mandatory. You can still have a great career overall.
Okay, so it seems like organization skills, attention to detail, communication skills help. What skills would you stay away from? Like, I know, legally speaking, I would not want somebody who's laissez-faire, just chilling, laid back, is pretty bad with their time. Because, sure, you may be able to survive.
Yeah.
But you would hate your life because you would have to change your character because you have court dates coming.
Yeah.
Crazy deadlines all the time,
right.
Surprises, your ability to adjust is super important.
Yeah.
So what are some red flags that people should know? If you are something like this, don't be an accountant.
Yeah, and I think you kind of said it right there. That's exactly the kind of things that you have to kind of consider, because the field that we work in is one deadline based. So you can't just do things when you feel that you want to do them or get to them, or when your personality allows you to get to them. So you do have to be somewhat focused and be able to get to that quickly and work under pressure, because it's a deadline-based environment. And also, like I said earlier, we were talking about billable hours.
Yeah.
So you are being monitored on what you do all the time, right? Like at the end of the day, you can't be like, hey, today I'm going to have somewhat of a chill day, but tomorrow I'll work really hard.
Yeah.
And I know that works in certain fields, because you need to be super focused at certain times, and then other times you can do other things that might be helping you in that field, but doesn't require super laser focus all the time. But so those are the two things. If you're detailed and you can work under pressure, and deadline-based pressure, and you don't mind being, working consistently all the time, then I think that's fine for you. But otherwise, you're definitely not the person. You'll start to hate it more and more, right? Because and one of the biggest things that people always say when they leave public, they're like, the worst part was tracking my time all the time.
I completely get that.
Yeah.
While we're talking, it just clicked to me. Would somebody hate this job because it's redundant? Like, is the job actually redundant? Or, like, for instance, you said you perform audits. Is that audits all the time? So you're literally just one company, audit comes in, you perform an audit. And for taxes, it's similar. I'm guessing compliance and advisory requires a lot more. It's different on day to day. But would you say that the overall job of an accountant is redundant? Because I know a lot of people hate the fact that everything is just same exact day over and over again.
I think, you know what, I would say there's a sense of redundancy for sure, in no matter whether you're in tax, audit, or compliance. Because again, like I said, compliance standpoint, you're doing the same thing for every company. You're making sure that financial statement's done, tax returns are done, HST is filed, T4 and T5s are prepared, and making sure they're hitting any check. So that has to be done for every company. Where it's different and where it's versatile a little bit is that there's different issues for every company. So if you're talking about audit, an audit issue is going to be very different for the type of company that you're dealing with, right? So if you're dealing with an oil industry versus a finance industry, you'll audit them in completely different ways. So you learn different skill sets, and that's what kind of creates your experience and makes you into that. Eventually, as you're growing as a manager, senior manager, and a partner, like, you have dealt with so many different industries that you've done something new. So you can't just say that, hey, yeah, I've been doing audit for the same time. Sure, you're making sure the financial statements are good, and that's the final goal. But you are learning new skill sets along the way on how to audit these companies. Same thing with tax. Tax, sure, let's just say you figure out one tax strategy that you want to use on a client. You might use that strategy 100 times in your career. So that's a repetitive part of it. But at the same time, strategies will also change throughout your career. So you're learning new strategies along the way, what makes sense for different companies, and what tax laws are changing, right? So as those tax things change, you have to be up to date with the knowledge. You're learning a lot of new things. Professional development is something that we have to do throughout our careers. I think as a CPA, we're required to do, I think, 40 hours of professional development every year. So
that's a requirement.
That's a requirement.
Not optional.
Yeah. And 20 hours is something that doesn't have to be vouched, and the other 20 hours has to be vouched, specific credited hours. So if I took a course, they'll provide me with a certificate saying that, hey, you've spent 4 hours doing this course. So that's 4 of your 40 hours. So every so often, the governing body, the CPA Ontario, for example, could ask you for your PD hours, show me that you've kept your skill set up to date.
Fair enough. We have to do the same thing.
Yeah, and I think it requires for most professionals, and that's the new part of things. So you are doing something different. Like when I have clients, sure, when a client is just starting off, they'll have very similar issues to any other client starting off. That, hey, get incorporated, make sure you do this, make sure you do that, make sure your bank's set up this way, and you're taking care of all these things. But by the time their business is getting bigger, again, the advisory is completely changing. So they might say that, should I be doing this or should I be doing this? Should I acquire this business? Should I sell my business? Should I sell shares of my business? Or should I just sell the assets of my business? So like, that's a very different question that I deal with from a day-to-day basis. And based on the industry that you're in and based on the situation the client's in, you might advise them differently. Like there might be cash flow issues on why you might say one answer versus the other. Versus someone who might not have cash flow issues, you can stretch out the way the acquisition happens, right? So like, that's not something you can learn on the job. That's not a theory concept that you just read and like, oh, I know how to do this and now I can do it perfectly. This is experience that you get along the way when you're working with different companies in your career. So there's a redundancy part to it, and I think that happens in every career. So if someone feels that, hey, I want something that I'm going to do new every single day, I don't think that exists, because you will never be good at your job. So until you do some things multiple times, that experience can't build up, and you can't do something with high quality and provide that experience.
Got to get the reps in.
Yeah.
Do you think there's any other skills to address that conversation?
So I think besides it being repetitive at times, and I think we've kind of highlighted all the aspects of the jobs that are challenging. So it can be somewhat repetitive, which as a person you might find challenging to get up every day, put in that long hours when you need to, having the endurance during busy season, because you're doing this for multiple weeks in a row where you're working maybe 50 plus hours. you're losing a little bit of your social skill set, social life. And sometimes you're working with also bad managers and bad clients, right? So you have to keep that in mind. Like sometimes the same field, your manager has a direct or your partner has a direct impact on how much you like your job, right? Like I said, if your managers and partners make your job very stressful, you're likely to get out of there very quick and have a very high turnover versus someone who you're like, hey, I really like working with this guy. And you think of that as your coworkers too. Sometimes if you have a good group around you, you want to stay around a little bit longer, and you're willing to do the hard work and some of the work that you might not love. But at the same time, if you don't even like the overall aspect of it, then all these other things make it so much more challenging.
So, I mean, is there anything else that you dislike about being an accountant outside of it could potentially be redundant and the people that you work with really impact your day to day?
No, I think I actually enjoy accounting to that aspect, because I think as you get to those higher levels, and again, keep in mind the lower levels, you'll always do the grunt work. There's always going to be an aspect of having these challenges that we talked about. But also at the partner level that I'm at now, I think it's interesting because you get to put on different hats, right? I get to bring in sales, to bring in new clients all the time, right? Updating my skill set. There's a lot of PD and a lot of you're very much at the forefront of knowledge as well, and then making sure you know what's going on at current day so you can advise your clients accordingly. So you're much more connected to the market and what's happening around the world. You're a bit more connected to the news and the economy and the new tax changes that are happening. So you're dealing with a lot of new things, and they're quick, and new clients will come in, and you're essentially working 24/7 in a way, but it's fun because whether you're with your friends or whether you're meeting someone new, they're like, oh, by the way, this is what, and you ask them about what their life is, what the business is, like, oh, by the way, do you do this? And like, oh, I've never thought of it that way. And that's, in a way, you're selling yourself because you have so much knowledge that you can present to them, also help them. But at the same time, they feel like, oh, I need the difference between a good accountant versus someone who just does compliance is that itself, right? Like, how well can you speak outside of just getting my tax return done? How much can you advise me otherwise that someone else might not be doing it? And a lot of times when people switch accountants, it's not because one accountant just didn't file their tax returns or they don't have the capacity. It's because they're not doing all the other things. They're not having those conversations with their clients. So that's the fun part of accounting. And I think that's the part I really appreciate, because not only do I get to speak with different clients, I get to see different industries. So I get to see, wow, this is what was needed in this industry for it to be successful, or how does the hours for this person look like? What type of businesses have different types of margins, and what's the challenges are in those businesses? And you help clients deal with those challenges, whether they might require financing or they might require space. And you're like I said, you're their financial advisor to a certain extent. So you're also connected to everybody. So I'll go back to this quickly. One of the skill set that really helps me in that social side of it that we were talking about is, if you're social, for example, you'll have a network of people that you deal with, right? So at any given time, I have 3 or 4 lawyers that I can call and get an answer instantly if I need to, without having to worry about sending an email and formally doing billings and all that type of stuff. Not just lawyers. So for example, you'll have tax accountants, you have lawyers, you'll have real estate agents, you'll have, like just a different piece of network, bankers, mortgage lenders. So anyone that I need to speak to sometimes, I have the knowledge at my fingertips. I can text them, I can call them. So if a client needs something, I can often get them answers much more quicker, or at least give them the peace of mind. And that network can be super helpful. So you being social sometimes can be one of the biggest advantages, even though, again, not required, but can be very helpful at that later stages in your career when you're dealing and you're very much client facing.
Fair enough. Well, I mean, you have to have enjoyed accounting. You stuck around for like almost 2 decades at this point. And so, I mean, it's cool to hear because you also started your own firm, right? Yeah. And so what's the name of your firm?
AC Partners Professional Corporation.
And you provide services all across Ontario, obviously. I'm guessing most of your clients are in GTA.
Yeah, that's right. So because again, we are a remote firm, we have a very much of a hybrid model. So I do have an office space as well to have my staff come in and be able to train and grow. And even if clients need to come in, we have boardrooms and stuff to work with. But we provide, I have clients literally from all ends of Ontario. So I don't need to travel as much anymore. So in the beginning, pre-COVID, it was like I could have a client meeting in Markham and my next meeting could be in Waterloo. So I'm on the road for most of my day for 2 meetings, right? So versus now I can have a meeting in the morning, I have a meeting in the afternoon, or back-to-back meetings, and I can be at my desk, which is super helpful.
So now that you have your own firm, how does that differ from working at another accounting firm? And tell me more about the services that you actually provide.
Yeah, so I think a lot of the partners, again, if they're in the compliance piece, they'll provide similar services. But I think how it really differs is like there was a point in time where when I was working for some of the mid-sized firms, I wanted to be a partner at those firms. So there's a larger ownership and you buy into a piece of the business. But when you're working with multiple partners, you have to keep in mind they're all owners of the business, right? So more the owners, the more harder to make decisions at times. It's also useful as well, don't get me wrong, but if you're working with multiple partners, everyone has a vote, for example, how and where the firm should be going, right? So as a firm, you could choose to have, if you're, let's say, growing the firm, right? You could have organic growth where you could have all partners go out and bring in as much business as possible, or you could actually have acquisition and grow by buying smaller accounting firms and different practices. Both models kind of work based on what you want to achieve. But again, as you're trying to grow in that sense, you will have to work with the partners that are there at each of those firms. So if you have a partner that is let's ground and grind and make sure we get a lot of work done by a lot of staff, versus some partners are more about, hey, I want to make sure my retention is there. I don't care about how much work I get done as long as they stay next year. For me, that's more easier because I don't have to train as much. So they have a different mindset on how to run their business and their firm. So I think it's the business decisions that you often overlap and have to either adjust with. But as a single firm owner, it's much more easier to have a direction. So less partners. Essentially, you were able to make a decision on where the firm should be going, what clients you want to keep. Versus if you have a larger group, you can still do that. You can grow in all directions. You can have partners take care of specific type of clients, which can also be useful. So there's good and bad to those things. But when you're trying to open up your own firm, I think there's different hats you put on. It's not just about your accounting knowledge anymore, because that's something a lot of people have. But it's also, you'll have to have a marketing hat on, right? How to make sure you have your a good website, how to make sure you're getting out there, your business cards, how are your referral sources and so forth. Admin side of it, which is also huge. You don't realize how much is going on in the back end. There's IT side of things, then there's the sales side of things. There's also the accounting side of things on top of that, because you're getting file work and stuff out. So there's a lot of different things that you're doing and you're juggling on your own. At a firm, when you become a partner, a lot of the other things are sometimes taken care of for you, because you hire the right staff and admin work will get done. You still have to be responsible for hiring and decisions like that. But, there will be a HR team on your disposal. There will be an admin team on your disposal. There'll be a marketing team on your disposal. So those are the different things. And some people want to be like, hey, I want to be part of a bigger firm because I only want to focus on my clients and not have to worry about making all these decisions. I'll let the other partners do that for me. Versus some people like the autonomy, right? Again, when you're alone, you get to make that decision and do it any way you like.
And I'm guessing there's other benefits as well, which I'll ask you about now. So one of the questions I know everyone's going to be interested in is about the money.
Yeah.
So, talk to me, when you get into this field, how much money can you expect to make as a junior accountant, a senior?
Yeah.
And let's talk about that in the actual accounting field, because you did do that. Right. And then let's talk about the benefits of owning your own firm and how that pads your pocket.
Yeah. So I think money, for example, I think obviously when you first start off, again, it's a tough. I think for a lot of the professionals, the first couple of years is very tough because you're working a lot of hours. You're based on a salary-based employee, so it doesn't matter if you work 60 hours or 40 hours, you still get the same paycheck. When I started off, and this is, again, like I said, back in 2010, 2008 was my first job, but back then my starting salary was $40,000.
What city?
This was in Mississauga.
That's a pretty big city.
Yeah, and at that time it was nothing. I think starting now, someone who's in the CPA route and eventually going to write their exams, I think the starting is anywhere between 55 and 65,000. I think that's where the range is at the moment. You can expect your 5 to 10% increases almost on a yearly basis, just because you grow pretty quickly. You get your charter within the 3-year mark. So if I said, let's just say 55 to 65 as a junior, as a senior, looking at between 75 and 90.
And how long does that jump take to senior?
I think each of these jumps, again, depends on the firm, but on average, I would like to say close to between 2 and 4 years. So let's say 3-year averages approximately. 55 to 65, I would say between 65 and 90 would be a senior manager in that 90 to 110, 120 range. Senior managers will be in that 110 to 150 range. And then a lot of the partners at the firm will, and that's where it varies on how efficient your firm is, how much staff you have, how much overhead you have, and how much you can take home. But the take home for a partner could be anywhere starting at 200,000 to $1 million, for example, or maybe even higher. But you would see that in the multi-100,000, $500,000 would be, I would say, a pretty fair average for a lot of the partners that take home. It takes time to get there. You also have to, if you're working at a firm and you're eventually allowed to become a partner and you get voted in, you have to buy a piece of that business, right? You're a business owner at that time. So you're buying into the piece of the business, and then when you retire, you sell that piece of business. So there's equity on that as well that you earn. But that's the expected recovery, I would say.
So how long does it take to become a partner roughly, you would say? So you said about 3 years for all these jumps.
Yeah.
Partnership comes let's not go about the special cases. Let's go on average.
Yeah.
Obviously it's subject to a vote as well, but at the end of the day, let's say ballpark.
I don't know. I would like to say, if I'm just guessing, it'll take you about 15 years to become a partner.
15 years.
15 years. You could get there faster depending on, again, the path that opened up for you sometimes, right? Like that could be a big determinant factor. But I would say at the very least 10 years. Because again, there's a lot of knowledge to be learned as well. So I think 10 years is the bare minimum. 15 is probably like the amount that you usually see, but it could also be up to 20 years. So it all depends on what you're doing, what you're specializing in,
how hard you work.
Also, a big part of it is, again, like I said, sales. If you bring in a ton of business and you're dealing with a lot of clients, you're very client facing, people want to give you the opportunity to be able to do that and grow the business, right? So that could get you there a bit faster. Or if the firm's growing, right? Like sometimes if your firm has a really good reputation and they're able to bring in a big clients or have a market covered really well, you might be able to bring in a lot more business a lot quicker, especially if the city is growing, for example. That'll create more partners within that firm. So some of it could just happen organically. And if you're good at being client facing, again, that social skills, you could get there faster. Or again, sometimes tax skills. So if you did in-depth tax courses, you're the main partner of a firm and other partners are going around you, they're all leading at you to do more tax specific work. It means your work is growing. Your clientele is technically growing accidentally as well, call it through other partners. And that could also get you there. So I would say 15 years is the mark that someone should take. I think also they should keep their ears and eyes open in front of them in terms of what opportunities are coming up and what they need to do to adapt to become a partner if that's what they want to do.
Okay. And what about when you're owning your own firm? Is it more profitable or do you do it from a work-life balance perspective?
I did it from a work-life balance perspective. I think that was the approach. I did see, at the end of the day, you have to keep in mind, like I said, we work on a deadline and we work for our clients at the end of the day, right? So at a lot of the partners at these firms, they might not have to track their time anymore because they're owners of the business and not employees, but they are still working a lot of hours, right? They're still out there spending a lot of time with their clients or doing the research or doing their PD. And I often saw, and again, this is a wide variety, but I have seen partners that often work 60 hours all around the year. They're making $1 million, sure, but they work a lot of hours. So for me, it wasn't necessarily about the money that, hey, I want to make a lot of money, so I'm going to become a partner here. But for me, it was like, how do I create my work-life balance lifestyle? And again, when you are starting a firm, so me and my wife started this firm, and that time we had the option of what type of clients we want to keep, right? How many hours we want to work? How quickly do we want to hire? Or do we want to spend more time doing a lot of the file work? So I did it more from a work-life balance perspective. But again, you do have better margins, obviously, if you're an owner in a business, call it a partner or self-made.
Okay, so we're expecting you start off 55K, and you get bumps as you go along, 5 to 10%.
Yeah.
you get up to 100,000 within 3 years, and I mean, you're pretty much sky's the limit
I'd say
after
about 5
that.
to 6 years you get to the 100,000 mark because
Yeah.
you have to kind of pass that senior level. So you're probably a junior for, like I said, 30 months, 3 years. Then you're a senior for about 3 years, and by the time you get manager, you could probably hit that $100,000 mark.
So an accountant, when they start off, how much debt do you think they enter the profession in?
Not a whole lot. Your
Undergraduate fees?
I would say that's actually probably likely your only debt, because when you're working for a lot of these firms, they pay for your exams. That's one of the things to attract to get you there, right? So they'll pay for all your modules, capstones, and exams. So that's really not on you. Keep in mind, they do pay for it one time. So if you have failed, that could be additional money that you have to pay out of your pocket to. They're not massive costs. So those costs can be anywhere, but I would like to say maybe $5,000. So it's not super expensive, and you might have to take on that debt for a few months until you pass and you get the results. But again, usually gets covered for, so there might not be much there. And then your undergrad fees. So depending on if you paid for university or your parents paid for university or something like that, or if you took a loan to go there. So a lot of people take OSAP. So the way that loan works is they give you money for all the courses that you need. And then eventually your payment period only starts upon graduating and getting a job. And that time there's a minimal interest on those loans. So people try to pay that off over the course of a few years.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Well, I feel like we covered a lot. Some few questions.
Sure.
I wanted to know. So we talked a lot about public accounting,
Yeah.
and I know you didn't go into industry.
Yeah.
But do you have a rough idea about what are the actual tangential options that an accountant has if they decide after their CFE?
Yeah.
They
Like after
want.
they get their CPA.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. After they
Yeah.
get their CPA, they go into industry. What does that mean? What is industry?
Industry means essentially instead of doing public accounting work and working on multiple clients with different industries, you go to one of those clients that you maybe used to do work for and work within their departments. And the departments could be, depending on what you want to do, again, what kind of role you want to have. So often CPAs are often known to go in and become controllers of a company. So instead of you being the auditor that checked financial statements, you were the controller that made the financial statements internally before giving it to an auditor, right? So you could be responsible for a department within industry, right? So you could be controller of the Canadian division of Walmart or the Ontario division and things like that. So that's one of the places that people go. People go into the industry, again, eventually go into a finance role and go into eventually trying to become a CFO of a company. Or potentially CEO of a company, depending on what you used to do. So a lot of people who are in advisory can also become CEOs because that's what they're essentially meant to do. Some of the other things that people can go into is acquisition and mergers, valuations specifically. You could get into tax, such as like cross-border tax. So these are some of the other things. People also become, financial analysts. At different roles or forensic accountants. So there's a lot of different roles for CPAs. And like I said, I think the stamp that you've gotten is that you're a competent person. You can do anything that's kind of thrown at you. So you have a lot of options. So, if you like sports, you could go into a finance role for a sports team or for a specific industry, right? So I remember back then when I was thinking about potentially switching out, I was trying to look at a finance job at the MLSE so I could see Raptors games and I could go to Blue Jays games and things like that. So there's a lot of options and there's a lot of fields out there. And I think the idea is that you want to work on one specific industry and specialize in it and kind of move up the ranks within that rather than work in the public accounting field.
Okay.
It's like being an in-house counsel when you use this for a lot of the law firms and stuff, right?
Okay. Yeah. And do you find that a lot of people work in public accounting for a few years and then make the jump after? Yeah. Is there an advantage to doing one or the other before?
I think the main thing is, like I said, so it's all the things that we talked about that you dislike about the industry in the first few years, especially when there's long hours, repetitive work, possibly maybe bad managers, maybe bad clients, maybe the billable hours that's bothering you, and maybe the social life of it that you don't have much of a social life for a few months of the first few months of the year. So I think so often those can be reasons why people jump out. And like I said, the stat that I gave earlier, I think more than 50% transition after you get your CPA to go into other industries. So not that they don't want to be a CPA anymore, but they don't want to do public accounting work specifically. And I think also the pay is the big thing. So often when you're moving from public accounting to industry, often you see that jump that, hey, let's say if you were a senior or almost a manager and you were making, let's just say between $75,000 and $90,000, often these jumps will get you to that $100,000 mark right away, right? And higher. So a lot of people that go into other industries can make $200,000, $300,000 depending on where you're going and how much work is required. So you might not switch because you don't want to do more work. You might want to do more work, but you might want to get paid accordingly. So it's all up to what your decision factor is there.
I mean, I'm sure you have friends in the private industry. Do they say they work less?
No, not necessarily. So sometimes they work more, but they also make a lot more money at different times of the year. And maybe it's a bit more consistent for them. Like they might not have just a busy season every year that, hey, I can't chill in February, March, and April. They might do that in different times of the years. There might be more traveling required sometimes, right? So it all depends on what they picked up, and they might make more money. But at the same time, I've also seen people go into even government-related jobs. So a lot of the CPAs will go into government roles where they're financial analysts or go into financial reporting because, again, they know how to construct financial statements. They understand the rules behind it. So for different industries, there's different rules, and they go in there and specialize in that, which is, again, any government-related job that's usually much more specific in terms of hours, right? You will never work more than 9 to 5 ever, right?
Let's be honest. It's laid back.
It's laid back, right? And that can be, again, like I said, work-life balance is huge, right? So someone who wants to spend more time at home with their kids and be more family-oriented, like they'll pick something that's more laid back, and I think that's fantastic.
I'd like to take you back down memory lane. You've been in the field for quite some time.
Yeah.
Let's say you were talking to 18-year-old Ankur.
Yeah.
What would you tell that person?
I think it's not even specific advice about being in accounting, but I always say this, switch to tax early. No, I'm just I always say that you have to stick out and stick it out to a certain extent. You don't really get to experience what a field is and the good parts of it until much later in your career, especially as a professional. So the first few years can be, again, a lot of grunt work, a lot of heavy hours, and not feeling that you're really excelling to your full capability. So I think you do have to stick it out, understand that there's the groundwork and those bricks have to be laid into the foundation has to get there before you can really flourish and be the best version of an accountant or whichever role you might want to be within the accounting field. So I think that's the advice I would give, that, hey, that time does pass. So don't think your first 5 years of your careers is the reflection of your next 20. Often your next 20 is actually completely different. And like I said, if eventually as you stick it out, you get higher and higher, there is much more, less redundancy and a lot more learning and a lot more fun within that field. And I think you also have to understand who you are as a person. If you know that role is not for you and something you would like, regardless of all the things that we talked about today, then I think you should consider other things as well, not necessarily to become a professional.
So what tips would you give to a junior, let's just say along the way, what helped you during university? What helped you, like things that, you think you struggle with, and had you known them, your life would have been slightly easier. So we can go through university, we can go through the exam process, we can go through junior accounting.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if there's anything specific I would really give advice on. Obviously, you have to do the work. You can't avoid it. If you're looking for shortcuts, that's not the field for you. I think you have to kind of go through those challenges of studying and passing exams, working long hours at times, learning and being monitored from a time perspective. But again, keep in mind that time does pass. So my thing would be your endurance needs to be a little bit better. I think you need to go in with much more positive mindset. Understand that attention to detail matters. One of the biggest advice I always give is the mistakes that you make in your career, always learn from them, because if you repetitively make the same mistakes, that image sticks with you within a firm, within a company, and then it really doesn't allow you to grow in that career. Your projection of where you could have been versus where you are can be just the fact that you're not willing to learn quick enough and focus on your career early on, because that does matter. And that's the only advice I would really give. I think as long as someone that's willing to stick it out and learn and grow, and I think you can always have a successful career.
I think you said a lot, but what I heard was over the entire interview,
Yeah.
you have to be able to work like long hours.
Yeah.
You have to be quite organized. You mentioned things along. We have had these discussions ourselves that each year you learned from last year
Yeah.
and you tried to adjust for next tax season or
Yeah.
next thing season.
You get efficient along the way, right? And I
Yeah.
think that's for you to understand how to become more efficient, because obviously something that I used to do 10 years ago, I did it much more slowly versus now I can do it much more faster. So I think you learn your efficiencies along the way. I think the best thing about being a CA, I think at the end of the day, you have to keep in mind, it always keeps your options open. So like I said, I get to work with different people, look at different companies. And eventually, if I ever want to go into industry, because of the vast knowledge that you grasp over the course of your time, you can always do that. So being a CPA is a really good thing on your resume, a really good designation to hold for that purpose. So you're very versatile versus somebody else that who goes into medicine, for example, has to be in that field, and switching out of it requires a whole different skill set. So I think that's a good part about being a CPA.
Sounds like a pretty cool gig.
Yeah, no, it's not bad.
Well, thank you very much for all of your time. I appreciate having you. And yeah, it was awesome.
No, thanks for having me. It was awesome. It's fantastic. I think it's good that kids coming up get to understand what an industry is like, not be afraid of the hard work necessarily, but at the same time understand what they're getting themselves into, and being able to make that decision early on is massive. I always hoped that so being able to make that decision early on is massive, and I really hoped I had those things available to me from a counselor or from an accountant to be able to really tell me what the industry was about. So no, thanks for having me. I was glad to be able to do this.
That's it for this episode of the My Career Shop podcast. Thank you for tuning in, and I hope you have a better idea of how to become an accountant and what to expect once you actually become one. More detail about this episode and CPAs is on the My Career Shop website, links to which are either in the description below or show notes based on where you are watching or listening from. Please leave a review and comment on what professions you want me to invite next and what other information you would be interested in learning. Until next time.